In 2001, an American computer company on the brink of bankruptcy launched a tiny white plastic box that could hold 1,000 songs in your pocket. That device was the Apple iPod. Within a few short years, it didn't just save Apple from financial oblivion. It triggered a multi-hundred-billion-dollar digital revolution that permanently reshaped modern consumer technology. Yet the most shocking part of this story isn't Steve Jobs' genius or Apple's slick marketing. The truly astonishing part is that Apple was never supposed to win this war. 20 years earlier, an untouchable Japanese technology empire had already invented the entire concept of portable personal audio. They owned the undisputed global king of music players, the legendary Walkman. They possessed the world's most brilliant hardware engineers, an invincible worldwide retail supply chain, billions of dollars in cash reserves, and even owned one of the largest, most profitable record labels in the music industry. That company was Sony. Sony had every possible technological, financial, and cultural weapon to dominate the digital music era years before Steve Jobs even dreamed of the iPod. Instead, Sony handed a $100 billion market to its biggest American rival on a silver platter. This is the unbelievable story of how corporate arrogance, toxic internal civil war, and a paranoid fear of piracy destroyed Sony's music empire and surrendered the future of technology to Apple. To understand how high Sony once stood, we have to travel back to Tokyo in the late 1970s. In 1979, Sony's legendary co-founder, Masaru Ibuka, wanted a way to listen to opera during long-haul trans-Pacific flights without being forced to drag around a heavy reel-to-reel tape recorder. Sony's audio engineers stripped down an existing portable journalist recorder, removed the bulky recording head, paired it with featherlight stereo headphones, and named it the Walkman TPS L2. The Walkman was not just a successful gadget. It was an explosive global cultural earthquake. It didn't simply sell millions of units. It created an entirely new category of human behavior. For the first time in human history, people could detach music from furniture and take a private personal soundtrack anywhere, walking down city avenues, riding crowded subways, or exercising in the gym. Over the next 20 years, Sony completely owned personal audio across the planet. They sold hundreds of millions of cassette Walkmans, followed by the iconic Discman for compact discs, and later the futuristic digital mini disc. The name Walkman became a universal household word, officially entering the Oxford English Dictionary. In global consumer electronics, Sony wasn't just a market leader. It was revered as an untouchable god of hardware design and manufacturing perfection. In fact, a young Steve Jobs admired Sony so intensely that he treated the company as his ultimate creative blueprint. Throughout the 1980s, Jobs regularly traveled to Japan to visit Sony factories, studied their sleek black aesthetic, bonded with Sony co-founder Akio Morita, and routinely handed out Sony products to Apple employees as the absolute gold standard of product execution. Jobs even adopted his famous black turtleneck uniform after being inspired by the custom designer uniforms Sony workers wore on their factory assembly lines. Sony seemed destined to rule the audio and gadget world for the next century. Then, in the late 1990s, the consumer internet exploded, unleashing a digital tsunami that terrified the global entertainment industry. MP3 audio compression and peer-to-peer file-sharing networks like Napster. Almost overnight, millions of consumers were ripping their plastic audio CDs into lightweight digital MP3 files and trading music across the internet for free. The traditional music industry went into complete, unbridled panic, viewing digital audio files as illegal piracy that threatened to annihilate album sales and destroy their multi-billion-dollar business model. For Sony, this revolutionary moment should have been the greatest corporate opportunity in history. Sony occupied a unique position that no other company on the planet could match. They were a giant hybrid entertainment titan. On one side, their consumer electronics divisions manufactured world-class audio players, stereos, and televisions. On the other side, in 1988, Sony had purchased CBS Records for $2 billion to establish Sony Music Entertainment. Sony owned both the pipe and the water. They had the world-class engineering talent to build sleek, portable MP3 players, and they owned the massive music catalog, representing legendary artists like Michael Jackson, Celine Dion, Mariah Carey, and Bruce Springsteen to supply the digital tracks. No other tech company in Silicon Valley and no other record label in Hollywood possessed both sides of that equation. Yet, instead of providing an invincible competitive advantage, this hybrid model turned into a fatal corporate curse. Inside Sony's headquarters in Tokyo, a vicious, paralyzing civil war erupted between two deeply entrenched corporate factions. On one side were Sony's brilliant hardware engineers. They recognized that physical cassette tapes and compact discs were dying, and that consumers desperately wanted small, sleek digital players that could easily download, store, and play open MP3 audio files directly from their personal computers. On the other side were Sony's powerful music executives in New York and London. Sony Music was generating billions of dollars in cash flow by selling physical plastic compact discs for $18 each. The music executives were utterly terrified that if Sony built an open, user-friendly MP3 player, it would encourage music piracy, cannibalize CD sales, and bankrupt the record label. Sony Music executives outright refused to cooperate with the hardware engineers unless any new digital music player was crippled with extreme, ironclad copy protection software. Because Sony had grown into a fragmented conglomerate of autonomous, competing divisions with no centralized leadership to force cooperation, the company paralyzed itself. Instead of building a simple, open MP3 player, Sony spent years developing a proprietary audio compression format called a track, wrapping it in an aggressive digital rights management security system called OpenMG. To transfer a single song onto a Sony device, consumers were barred from dragging and dropping standard MP3 files. They were forced to install Sony's notoriously buggy, slow desktop software called Sonic Stage. The software forced users to connect to the internet, authenticate licensing rights, convert every song into Sony's locked proprietary format, and accept rigid restrictions that limited how many times a track could be transferred between devices. The user experience was an excruciating nightmare. At the 1999 Comdex Technology Trade Show in Las Vegas, Sony's internal dysfunction reached an embarrassing public climax. Two completely separate divisions within Sony walked onto the same stage and unveiled two competing digital music players at the exact same event: the Memory Stick Walkman from the audio division and the Veo Music Clip from the computer division. Neither team had communicated with the other during development. Both devices used incompatible storage media. Both were overpriced. Both relied on bloated DRM software, and both baffled consumers and tech journalists alike. Sony was so consumed by internal turf wars and protecting legacy CD profits that it had completely forgotten about the customer experience. While Sony was busy tearing itself apart from the inside, Steve Jobs and Apple spotted the massive, unprotected gap in the market. Apple had zero legacy record labels to protect. Apple didn't care about preserving $18 plastic compact discs. Steve Jobs realized that consumers didn't want proprietary file formats or copy protection barriers. They wanted simplicity, speed, and elegance. In October of 2001, Apple introduced the first iPod. Built around a compact 1.8-inch Toshiba hard drive and an intuitive mechanical scroll wheel, the device arrived with a brilliant, iconic marketing promise: 1,000 songs in your pocket. More crucially, Apple solved the software side of the equation. They paired the iPod with iTunes, allowing users to effortlessly rip CDs, manage digital tracks, and synchronize entire libraries with a single click. Then, in 2003, Steve Jobs pulled off the masterstroke that Sony should have executed 5 years earlier. He convinced the major record labels to license their tracks for the iTunes Music Store, selling individual digital songs legally for 99 cents each. Apple solved the entire digital music ecosystem from start to finish. Legally licensed tracks, effortless desktop management, and a gorgeous, intuitive hardware player. By the time Sony finally swallowed its pride, abandoned the hated-a-track format, and began supporting open MP3s in the mid-2000s, the war was already lost. Apple seized over 70% of the global digital music player market, selling hundreds of millions of iPods and turning the device into an unstoppable financial engine. The iPod didn't just revitalize Apple. It served as the critical technological and financial stepping stone that directly paved the way for the iPhone, the iPad, and Apple's historic rise to become a multi-trillion-dollar empire. The iconic Sony Walkman, which had defined mobile music for an entire generation, was quietly swept aside into the history books. The fall of Sony's music empire remains one of the most sobering and critical case studies in modern business history. Sony did not lose to Apple because they lacked engineering brilliance, manufacturing capability, or global brand recognition. They lost because internal corporate silos paralyzed their ability to collaborate, and the desperate fear of cannibalizing their existing profits blinded them to the future of technology. When a fundamental technological shift sweeps across an industry, your business model will be disrupted whether you like it or not. You can either find the courage to disrupt your own products, or you can sit back and watch your hungriest competitor do it for you. If Sony had put aside its internal corporate rivalries and launched an open MP3 Walkman with a digital music store in 1999, would Apple even be the tech giant it is today? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the hidden rivalries, dramatic downfalls, and legendary moves in business history.